Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishvara Guratmeti Moti Veda Vibhagine Vyomavda Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Sava Vedanta Siddhanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanantam Satguru Pranatosh Maham Om Shanti 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 Om. Namaste. Welcome everyone. We are continuing with our Vivekachudamani. Last class we covered verse 81, 82. The verse 82 says that just as the dream objects are not real, the objects in the waking state created by self-ignorance are not real. So this is an analogy very common to Vedanta. So Vedanta often takes the dream that we experience when we go into that dream state, and then we project the subjective content of our mind, our vasanas. They project whatsoever impressions it has, and then we create this reality, this apparent reality called the dream world, which belongs to the mind of the jiva. So the jiva projects that, and the jiva, when it comes out of that state, it has no difficulty to understand that, oh, nothing to worry. It was just a dream, right? It's just a dream. We know that it was not separate from my mind. I know that my mind has projected that. It did happen in my mind. It appeared to happen out there. It appeared to happen in space, time. It appeared that the objects were real, but actually it was a superimposition on my mind. It was the content, those impressions in my mind somehow shined into this dream world. So the dreamer technically is said to be the Taijaza, the shiny one. It shines and it projects its own subjective reality into this world called the dream world. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay. So we have that happens in the dream. Just as the dream objects are not real. So in the dream world, the dreamer, a lot of the time can be objectified. But we know that the dreamer is not really real. And the dream objects are not really real, and they will have no problem. Just that as the dreams are not real, the objects in the awakened states, the ones that we see out there, they are also not real, okay? They are created by self-ignorance. It's the self-ignorance that allows the mind of the jiva receive the impression from the world of objects and believe that superimposition in the mind is real, but they are just sensory perceptions, sensory inputs, sensory stimulus that comes to the mind, and the mind believes that it's real. So what happens in the dream state? The same thing happens because the mind shines with the projection, which is but whatsoever remains, impressions, memories, so on, that was left in the mind. So now we have in the awakened state, we have the awakened objects that appear in the mind, and again, we tend to believe that it is real. So therefore, we have this analogy that says, so the same way we awake from the dream state, we need to awaken from the awakened state realize that these objects and the waker and the objects that appear in the mind of a waker the same way are not real, just as the objects are not real for the dreamer. So the object produced by Maya Ishvara is not really real for the awaker once the awaker understands the non-dual nature of consciousness, nature of the self. It's a byproduct of self-ignorance. It's a byproduct of self-ignorance. So what does that mean? It means that the perception deceives all jivas. So all these sense perceptions that prints all these objects in our minds makes us believe that reality is duality and these objects are absolutely real. This is the avidya, this is the perception of the robe, the snake in the robe. This is the perception of the wave in the ocean and so on. It's a superimposition. In this case, this superimposition of the awakened state is a superimposition made by Maya Ishvara. Maya Ishvara projects this world, and this world occurs in the mind of the jiva. The jiva is the receiver of this projection of Maya Ishvara. So this universe depends on the jiva. The jiva is the one who is going to perceive and know and experience these projections, these superimpositions of names, colors, and forms. But the same way, it's not real. It's a byproduct of Maya. Maya operating the mind of jiva, referred as avidya, okay? It's not real. Therefore, the body-mind sense complex is not real. So the same way that the dreamer was not real, the body-mind complex, the one that perceives duality as reality, perceives the objects of the waking states as reality, the body-mind is not real, and all objects that appear in the mind of the body-mind sense complex is not real. So what is the only reality? You are the awareness of them. Yeah? You are the awareness of the sleeper, right? Are we with me? So we know that there is a dreamer and there are a lot of dream objects occurring. When I come out of that state, and then I realize, wow, all of that happened within my conscious mind, my consciousness. Okay, so what's the reality? Is the consciousness in which the dreamer and the dreaming object appeared. So in the awakened states, what's the only reality? Is the awareness in which the body-mind complex, the jiva, and all objects that are perceived through the jiva, okay, they all come and they all disappear when that state changes into the sleeping or the dream state again. So you are that awareness and you are free of change and impurities. So this awareness is free of change, as we have extensively examined, and it's free of impurities in the sense that there are nothing other than awareness. That's what it means, awareness. Consciousness is non-dual. The self is non-dual, right? So we moved through a little bit of these commentaries. And when we further reflect upon the fact that the mind is a simple succession of thoughts witnessed by awareness, the mind of the awakened state, the mind of the dream state, they are just images, they are impressions, they are vrids, they are thoughts, a succession of thoughts that appear in the screen of consciousness, either of the jiva in its dream state or the jiva in its awakened state. It's just a succession of thoughts / object. And there is one principle, one factor that is the only reality, which is the consciousness, the witnessing subject, non-experience principle in which all those succession of thoughts and objects occur. The notion of a waking world being a different order of reality from the dream world collapse, for both belong to Mithya. Now, when we take a stand and we analyze our experience from the standpoint of awareness, we see that there is no difference between those impressions, those thoughts that occurs in the mind of the jiva, the so-called ijaza, okay? And the image that occur in the mind of the Vishwa, the Jiva in the awakening state. So we have two states of mind of the Jiva, and this world of objects from those different states, they appear in the mind of the Jiva, and we have established that the mind of the Jiva exists within the scope of consciousness and not apart from consciousness. Without consciousness, this mind cannot experience any apparent reality. So all of this appears because consciousness is there, backing up, supporting, vivifying the mind. So therefore, on further reflection upon the fact that the mind is simply a succession of thoughts witnessed by awareness, the notion of a waking world being different from the dream world collapse, for both worlds belong to Mithya. Okay? Both worlds belong to the duality, experiencer and objects of experience. Okay? So all of those have in common what? Duality. It's the same jiva in two different states. In two different states of the same jiva, so both experience of duality, they are just the same, okay? Subtle objects from the dream world, dense objects from the awakened world, but they are both duality, they are just objects appearing in the mind of the same agent, the jiva, in its two states of mind or consciousness. What is present in both the dream and the awakening worlds is awareness. So that which is present would never change. It does not come and go. And there is another state there, which is the state of sleep. That which is present through the three states, never changing, which is not affected by the mental image, by the thoughts, objects that come and go, and the thoughts and emotions this image evokes. As we know, every thought carries with itself a sensation, an emotion, a feeling. So all of this is changing, and all of that is producing different thoughts, feelings, and emotions. But there is something that is there all through our experience through the three states, and that is consciousness, and that does not change. Okay, it's always present, and that does not change. That's the most important definition of reality, is that which we are as consciousness, never change and always ever present. Just as seeming difference between the individual and the totality are resolved by the implied meaning of the two terms, which is awareness, so the seeming difference between awake and dream objects are resolved by the common denominator, which is awareness. So the difference between the individual and the total, the individual and Brahman, or the totality of the manifestation, as we understood that the totality, the total means Brahman manifests, as Ishvara manifest. So the difference, this difference is a seeming difference between the individual and the total. And the same we can say, because both are awareness, so the same we can say between the waking and the dream objects. Both are what? Both are images or thoughts in the mind of the jiva, which means to say in the mind of consciousness, because the mind exists within the scope of consciousness. So just as the seeming difference between the individual and the totality are resolved by the implied meaning of these two terms, we know it means to say that the totality and individual are one and the same as consciousness, as awareness. So the seeming difference between awakening and dream objects are resolved by their common denominator, which is again consciousness. Okay? They are just appearance in consciousness. They are just objects appearing in consciousness, regardless of the state of mind of the agent called the jiva. But this is all happening in what? We say it's happening in the mind, but we know that the mind is inert. It happens in consciousness. Huh? Can you hear me? Okay. And if a waking state can be resolved in awareness, then the objective world no longer stands as an independent reality. So if the awakened state can be resolved as awareness, right? It's all awareness. It's a superimposition on awareness in the awakened state. It's not really real, okay? And then what kind of independent reality this meteor world has? So it just collapsed. No longer stands as an independent reality, okay? Because everything, finally enough, eventually is resolved into awareness, consciousness. All objects in all, both worlds, waking and dream world, they all resolved in awareness, as awareness. Therefore, this world, this meteor world we experience does not really stand as real, much less as an independent reality. It's all meteor. It is a mere appearance in consciousness, which can be nothing other than awareness. All that remains is the changeless self. So when we say that everything that appears in the mind appears in consciousness, okay, and it's nothing other than consciousness, it means what? It means that any kind of projection, for example, the mirage, we have a mirage and then we see a mirage on the desert. Okay, if we're really going to examine that mirage, that superimposition, that appearance, we're going to see that the mirage was resolved in what? Into the desert, sand. It's all the sand, okay? So when we examine and we see that there are a lot of waves in the ocean and we're going to come close to observe the waves, and then we see that the waves are in fact the ocean, the water of the ocean. So what happens to the wave? The wave was resolved in the ocean as the ocean, okay? We are looking for the substantial, independent, free nature of all phenomenon objects. Everything that happens in the phenomenon world has its substantial, essential, free, independent nature as consciousness. The same way all ornaments of gold have their true, essential, substantial nature in gold as gold. We can remove the names and forms of gold and the gold remains intact. But can we remove the gold and those ornaments of gold still survive? No, they don't stand. They do not have any independent existence on its own. So the same way, the entire reality, the so-called objects of the awakened state, they don't stand because they depend on the consciousness. They are made out of consciousness, they are sustained by consciousness, and they are experienced and known by consciousness. So there is no way that they can remain as a reality, much less as an independent reality. The only reality is the awareness, is the consciousness, because everything resolves themselves in awareness, the same way all images on the screen of the cinema, they are all the background, they are all the screen. When we go there to see all those superimpositions, there is none. So what happened with this world that we experience? They are just images that are happening within consciousness through the mind of the jiva. And all of that is a trick played by Maya, the greatest illusionist, right? Anything from you, David?
Anything from me? Not really. I'm wrestling with, a common denominator of consciousness is underlying, everything, um, and that just and it just we keep going back to that. I mean, it's the discernment and reminding that discerning is of all the D's, like the most important one. And what differentiates us, or what differentiates Vedanta from religion? Not really a question. It's just I just kind of think about. Well, Karen and I were talking about Christianity, and it just occurs to me, like, this is what differentiates Vedanta from Christianity, is this discernment of real and not real.
Yeah, and Vedanta states that the nature of reality is non-duality, that even God is not something other than, the self. So there is only the self. And the final conclusion is that the jiva is the self. The jiva is not the superimposed imposition, the so-called body-mind complex, or the upadi called the body-mind complex. So the jiva is the self because everything is the self. And this phenomenon called the jiva has the potential to understand that. All there is to this whole process of Vedanta is that. Whereas all these other religions, they see reality as God. But the God that they present as reality is the manifest God, is Ishwara manifest, is Saguna Ishwara, okay? Which are all those, this is, Saguna means to say Ishwara colored by the gunas, or Brahman colored by the gunas. The same thing about Ishwara 1, Ishwara 2, Brahman and Brahman, without gunas, Brahman colored by the gunas. Okay, so all religions, they have difficult to understand Nirguna Brahman, Brahman as the substantial nature of everything, because it's the only reality, because the nature of reality is one without a second. So that's what distinguishes Advaita and Vedanta. It's non-dualistic. It's not a question, no, the only reality is God, and we need to reach God, and so on. No, the only reality is consciousness, which is synonymous of existence. You understand? And the mind has a hard time to dwell and contemplate on those topics, on those, or these suggestions, or these declarations, or these teachings presented by the Upanishad, because it's extremely counterintuitive and subtle, But once we begin really examining our own experience, like we do with Vedanta, and then we start seeing that if we take ourselves to be the body, and then reality is duality, and there is time and space. If we take ourselves to be the mind, you understand? Again, there will be the subtle world of thoughts and emotions and feelings and memories, and those are all objects. It means to say reality is I, the observer, or I, the experience, and all these subtle objects appearing to me. But the moment that we take ourselves to be consciousness, you understand? And then the whole phenomenon of the subtle world and the physical world resolves into awareness as the only reality. And this is all there is to Vedanta, is to establish the individual as awareness, as consciousness, that which is always present, revealing, illumining, and experiencing, knowing any and everything that is in constant flux of change, appearing and disappearing. The entire phenomenal world come and go, disappear, change from moment to moment. there is something that does not depend on the experience of object. It's always free, independent, never changing, and always present. And this is what provides the jiva this sense of freedom and limitlessness, which is inherent to its true fundamental nature as consciousness. So the consciousness is the only reality. The same way the water is the only reality, fundamentally, essentially, is the only reality. There is no such a thing as ocean, and there is no such a thing as the wave. Ocean and wave, they are just projections or superimpositions, mental superimpositions, you understand? Project by the jiva, the mind. Through perception, we perceive things, and then we give name to things. And then things appear to be real. But the only reality is what? Is that consciousness in which all these things come and go, appear and disappear, changing from a moment to a moment. Okay? That's why it's important for us to begin connecting with this consciousness that we talk about as the only reality, as it shines in our very, very, very intellect, in our mind. Our intellect is where we can understand our nature as consciousness. And if we really observe carefully, following the logic presented by the Upanishads, we'll see that this consciousness is shining all the time. And it's the only thing that never changed. And it's always present through all the states. Through all the births and rebirths, there is always this consciousness, which is non-dual, because it's that which is shining in the minds, in the intellect of all jivas. You understand? We don't need to experience it as an object, but we need to understand that consciousness can be experienced in the sense that it's by the grace of consciousness that we experience the not self, the phenomenal world of objects from the dream and the waking state. We experience that by the grace of consciousness, the only reality. And where is this consciousness? It's with us at every moment of our life, 24/7, right? The mind is perceiving things, and then it's being hit by thoughts, feelings, emotions. Perceptions keeping change, vasanas keeping just coming up. But there is something there that we experience all the time as our very nature, not as an object.
And we don't experience consciousness. So consciousness is not an object.
That's why I said right now, consciousness is with us 24/7 through our life and beyond. How we know that? Because I understood these teachings of Vedanta to a certain extent, following the logic. And also we know that without consciousness, I cannot live. You understand? The moment consciousness dissociates from the body-mind complex, okay? And then what happens? The subtle body departs from the physical body begins decomposing, okay? And the subtle body is going to go to one of these lokas and it's going to dream its vasanas until it gets red, exhausts some punya and papa and gets back into the world of physicality again, okay? So we don't experience consciousness, but we know that we cannot experience the phenomenal world without consciousness. What it tells us, that consciousness is our nature. And if I want to understand consciousness, I can even say that I experience consciousness as my very nature. You understand? That by which the eye sees, that by which my tongue speaks, my ears hear, my hands can feel. You understand? Without consciousness, We are just that matter, energy. You understand? Changing energy, transforming energy, but we are not sentient. We are sentient due to consciousness. So consciousness actually, it is experienced by us because every experience is an experience of consciousness as my very nature. The ego thinks that I am experiencing this and that. But all that the ego can experience is, of course, the world of dream objects, the world of the waking states of the physical object. That's what the body-mind can experience. But all of that cannot happen. There is no experience without that element called consciousness, that which is infused the body-mind complex with life and with consciousness. You understand? So without consciousness, we cannot experience anything. So it means to say that in every experience, consciousness is present with the experiencer I, eu, I, the jiva, you understand? Consciousness is with us. So in every experience, what do we experience in every experience? We experience the object, and we experience consciousness. Let's hope it was a quick interruption. In every experience, when we experience the world, we experience the object and we experience consciousness. Without each, the object cannot be experienced.